Hello.
Cover, so we're going to get rolling here. There are some basic groupings where we can group messages that we're going to see here. Starting at the beginning, there's a long list of error codes that possibly you may have seen on the internet. I'm going to bring the web over here. Give it a second to refresh. There's a gigantic list of possible error codes that you could be experiencing. I'm not going to scroll through the whole list, but this list goes on quite far. Mostly we're going to talk about a specific few in this particular presentation. We're going to talk about the ones you're most likely to encounter. Generally speaking, when we're troubleshooting items like this, we only see a handful of these messages, so we're going to stick with the common ones. We can group error messages into two basic groups here. We can put them into two buckets of server and client side. Where you see an error is usually as informative as the actual error itself. So on the server side of the equation, you'll generally see messages when you perform a status inquiry, or if you click and view the debug log file. On the client side of the equation, license errors will appear primarily during the startup of the program. When you first double-click that icon and it starts to load, whether it's an AutoCAD or a Revit, doesn't matter. But you will also occasionally see them while the program is actually working. These are usually in relation to timeout functions. We'll get to that later. Okay, we'll start with the server side. Basically, 2015 products need LM Tools 1112. This ships with all 2015 product installers and can also be downloaded from the website. Please note that if you download it from the website, I'm going to show you a page here. If you download it from the website, it's something you should be able to find if you go to the Autodesk site and you search on 1112. Usually that'll take you right to the license manager itself. I'm going to scroll just a little bit here. You'll notice there are multiple versions of the software available. You want to download the one that's correct for your server machine. If it's a 64-bit machine, you want to install a 64-bit. If it's IPv6, you want to install IPv6. If you're installing it from one of our installation disks, it will automatically choose the correct one for you as you install it, so you shouldn't worry about it. It's important to note that earlier licenses will work with the newer license manager. So if you have existing licenses, putting a new manager is not going to affect it. When you combine licenses, you need to make sure you're copying both the package and increment portions when they're available, not just the increment. You'll find occasionally older instructions that people are following from, sometimes they stumble upon an old document or an old version of the software. These instructions were before the package portion of the license actually existed. We always try to clean up these instructions if we stumble across them, but they do pop up every now and again. So if you get a new license from Autodesk, you want to copy the whole license, both the package and the increment, and put it in the new file. It's also important to remove older duplicate licenses. Now, I'm going to describe this. It's a little confusing to some people, but it's important to note. If, for instance, you were on AutoCAD 2014 and you had 5 seats of the product, if you were upgrading to 2015, you do not have 5 seats of 2014 plus 5 new seats of 2015, which would equal a total of 10 seats. You don't have that. You have 5 seats of 2015. Users on a subscription will receive a package license which will let you open the prior versions. If you leave both of these licenses in the same file, both of these files or one of these files will not work, and we can't always tell which one it'll be. So when you're combining new licenses with old licenses, you want to pull the old stuff out. When you're building your processes, you can only have one service for Autodesk running at one time. What you can't do is separate your license service for each product. You can't have one for Autodesk, AutoCAD, one for Revit. You can't do that. You can't separate it by year. They got to be on one service, and you combine all your licenses. It's also important to note the licenses are coded, and they're coded to a MAC address and a server name, and you can't just move the license file. If you move your license server, you will need a new file constructed for that server. And I believe, Dave, we have a quick a poll question.
Yep, I'm going to be sending a question right now before we move on to the next slide. The trick question, does the Server Diagnostics tab audit licenses? The question is yes or no. Feel free to start answering the questions. Does the Server Diagnostics tab audit licenses? We're starting to get some answers. And
It's like we're at about 50% voting.
all right. So
Right.
just to move on a little quicker, I'm just going to close the vote in 3, 2, 1, and I'm just going to quickly share the results really quickly. And right now, 68% say no, 32% will say yes. And now I will continue with the presentation.
Gotcha. All right. We don't use the server diagnostics tab. This is important to note because it can, although it does look like it gives some information, we skip it. The problem is it may look like you have an issue when you actually do not. The licensing technology is created by Flexera, and it's not an Autodesk product, and it's used by many non-Autodesk companies that just share this licensing technology, and it's malleable. They program it to meet their needs. So I'm going to move the manager on the window here. As you can see, there are multiple tabs here. We just don't use the server diagnostics tab, and the reason being is if we click perform diagnostics, when we start looking through, we're seeing error codes, and I know this license is running just fine. So we can't necessarily count on all the information here because our software isn't programmed to utilize it. Other packages may use this information. It's just this is something that can create false positives on our side. So generally we stay away from it. Instead, we have two basic reporting options. We have a perform status inquiry, which is located on the server status tab. That would be right here. This is a perform status inquiry. And we also have a debug log file, which is located on the config services tab right here. There are two fundamental differences between the two reporting options. The status inquiry will show us what's running and who has what checked out. It also lists the time. And the debug log file will list information based on the last time the service was started. It will actually give you an audit list of everything that has been checked in and out since the last start install. Okay, now let's get to the good stuff. We're going to get to some actual errors in the status inquiry. This one was pretty wordy, so I kept it as a separate tab. Basically, it's pretty common. It's LMGRD is not running. It gives us a 15-570 error. This does basically tell us that the service isn't running. It doesn't give us too much detail past that, actually. But this is what it looks like in an actual screenshot. It's telling us that we can't connect to the service. Basically, the service isn't running. No licenses are going to be available here at all. Nothing should be running off of this server. It doesn't tell us exactly what has occurred. It gives us we have some areas that it might be. This could be, it's not starting because there are multiple services running. It could be starting because the license file has the wrong name in it. It could have the wrong MAC address. It could be also a port conflict, or it could just be that no one clicked start to start up the license. So as a side note, it's probably a good time to mention, when you reboot a server, if you configured LM tools correctly, it will restart that service for you. Basically, setting it up correctly is if this is our service, we have use services checked, and we have start server at power up. That's what this box is for. If this machine were rebooting, this would automatically start up for us, and I wouldn't have to come in here and manually start it. So occasionally, people don't check these boxes, and as a result, when they reboot their system, they get this message. So basic fix for this one is verify you only have one service running for Autodesk products. If you have duplicates, you want to stop them. You want to remove the duplicates, and you want to combine the license files. Then you want to try to start the service again. If that doesn't work, you want to verify the server name in the license file. The server name is the one thing that you actually could change if you needed to. Occasionally, people change the names of the machines, but they don't change the fundamental constraints behind the machine. You know, the MAC address doesn't change. As long as the MAC address didn't change, you can change the spelling of that in your license file if you had to. Okay. You also want to verify the MAC address in the file. If it's incorrect, you need a new file. If you're not sure what MAC address or server name to use, LM Tools will tell you. If you go to the System Settings tab, there is a computer name and there is a list of MAC addresses. I would use the first one on the list to start with. Usually that's sufficient. That's all you need. That's what your license file should be coded for. Past this, if there's still a problem, it's possible that you might need to bind your license file to a specific port in order to get it to work. an example for that would be, if this is our license file, you can see at the top of the license we have the name of the machine that this file is coded for. Like I said, this is the one part that could be manually changed, but it does need to match the machine. I just can't change it to anything arbitrary. And this MAC address needs to be the MAC address of this machine. If I thought there was a port problem with this license file, if there was another service that was running on our ports, we can't change the ports. Our products use ports 27,000 through 27,009 for our licensing kernel. So if something else is crowding a port, usually we'll see other competing products potentially trying to use 27,000. We can adjust what our product uses by putting a space after the MAC address, typing in 27,003. I like 3 because it's not close to 0. That's the only reason. As long as it's within our range, it should be fine. Save the file, then I would stop the license service and I would restart it, and it should bind it to that port. That will prevent some issues from happening. Okay, next slide. Okay, status inquiry, unsupported by licensed server. You can see in the middle of this list here, we have an AutoCAD error. Usually this message is a result of a specific problem with a specific license in the license file. Here, the licenses around it are working. That particular AutoCAD license is not working. This is telling us that a portion of the file is corrupt. Maybe that particular package and increment was built off of a wrong MAC address, or maybe a wrong server name. The license could have been combined wrong. Fixing it should be relatively simple. Basically, you want to back up a file before you make any adjustments to it. You want to identify the specific part of the file. Here, we know that it says the errors with AutoCAD, so I'd look for the AutoCAD portion of the file. I will delete that bad license and rebuild the file. Rebuilding a file should be as simple as going to autodesk.com/register and you log in. When you do that, you'll of course need to know the MAC address, you'll need to know the server name, and you'll need to know the serial number that you have for the product that you're having an issue with. With that information, you should get a new file built, and then you can just put it in place, stop and start the services, and you should be good. Another error we get is a status inquiry, a -97121 error. This can appear with a bad read of a license file, or it could be a corrupt file. Sometimes if you're performing a lot of start and stops of a license file because you're testing it, you're adding to it, you're testing it, it's possible that you can jumble things and you might need to take a little bit of time and slow down. So let's see, fixing it should be not too difficult. Let's see here. There we go. For fixing this, you should be able to stop the service and restart LM Tools. It might just fix it completely. If you're having issues stopping the service, sometimes stopping a service, it doesn't want to stop for you right away. In LM Tools, our standard stop procedure is we're going to check the force service shutdown box, we're going to click Stop Server, we're going to wait a couple seconds, we're going to uncheck the box, and then we're going to click Start Server. Usually that's sufficient. Occasionally, if you have a jumbled license, what will happen is it will take more time to stop than it probably should. If that's the case, if you're having problems stopping a service or starting it, you can always open the Windows Services panel or in your Task Manager, and you can stop and restart the service that way. Sometimes that works easier. And sometimes if you have multiple services running from different products, sometimes it's easier to manually stop the Autodesk service than to fish around in LM Tools to try to make sure the right service is stopped. Occasionally, you need to reboot the machine. Now, as far as reboots go, usually you do not need to reboot a server. Usually you don't. I would say the vast majority of cases you don't. Occasionally, though, after doing troubleshooting, a lot of starts and stops, every now and again you get a server that just, for whatever reason, that service doesn't completely stop. It's holding something in its memory, and every time you start it, it's failing. Sometimes you just need to restart that server, and then you'll find suddenly it works. You need to make sure the service is started, of course. Give that a try. If all the other blocks have been removed, it should start up for you right away. If it's still a problem at this stage, you might just need to rebuild the new license file, or if you were in the middle of adding information to the license file, maybe you just need to remove the new section and then rebuild that part and start over. The next place we have to find information is the debug log file. Debug log file is an audit list. It saves to its own file. and it will list the contents of the license file. It'll list what was running, and it does it since the last server stop and start. So if you were having a problem a week ago and you stopped and started the license service again and then tried to troubleshoot last week's problem, you've cleared out that debug file. That information that you had in the past will be gone. It's just important to note, if you need to troubleshoot something down the road or you wanted to research something else later, you probably want to make a copy of that file out so you can look at it. This particular audit will also tell you if an options file is currently being used. It'll tell you some of the functions you're using, and it will list all check-in and out times and the users that did it. And it'll tell you about license denials or bad licenses. Okay, so one of the messages we'll see is invalid license key, inconsistent authentication code. Usually this is indicative of a corrupt license file. Something is missing in the file or it's out of sync. Here it's telling us the section that it's having a problem with. In this case it's an AutoCAD license in the screenshot. Something's missing here, or something's just not quite right. If the file was moved from a different server, if the whole file was moved, you could probably say, well, you know, the whole file might be configured for a different MAC address. That could be it. Maybe it was typed in wrong when the new component was created, or the file could have simply broken. Occasionally, files will break if you're copying and pasting and copying and pasting. You want to make sure when you are, anytime you're looking at a license file and working with it, you want to make sure you're looking at it in a normal text editor. I don't like to use anything fancy. I like to use the most basic Windows text editor possible. I use TextPad. You could use WordPad, but I don't like using WordPad because it has formatting problems. Eventually, you could accidentally use the formatting tool. You change any of the formatting in that file and you break it. And if you're copying and pasting from one machine to another, and you lose some formatting along the way, you could break the file, and it could give you a failure in the authentication code. Doesn't necessarily mean the whole file is ruined. In this particular case, it's connected to the AutoCAD license. If it's connected to the AutoCAD, I know I just need to worry about that. So at least you can focus in on what you need to do. Basically, just back up and archive that file you have. I don't like to delete anything outright if I can avoid it. In case something was done wrong in the transfer, for maybe I loaded the file wrong. I want to make sure I have the original. Identify the specific license, delete the broken part, and you rebuild it. Just grab a new license file. You need the MAC address, the server, and the serial like usual, and that should take care of that. Occasionally, you see a message that says denied. License number of users already reached. It's direct enough. All your licenses are currently in use, and as a result, the next person that comes along to try to pull a license, they can't get one. You basically reached your maximum limit. When you get something like this, at this stage I switch tabs and I do a status inquiry. I'm going to review who has what. At this stage you find out who's pulled all the licenses. If anything looks strange, of course, this is what you're going to see. You're also going to ask, at this stage I'd ask users, I would find users that maybe went away for lunch or aren't using the license. They just have it open because they're looking at something, they're not really using it. I would ask them to return the license for somebody that needs it. In this case, you can also implement an options file, and you can use an options file to restrict future users from pulling a license. If you know you have to have licenses for a specific group all the time, you can isolate people outside of the group so they do not pull those licenses at all. Granted, that lets other users not access particular functions at certain times. For some people, that's what they need. So you can restrict users in an options file. You can also add a timeout expiration to the file. So if somebody has a license open for a period of time and they're not using it, you can have the system try to reclaim that license while they're not using it. And you can also restrict usage borrowing. I avoided talking about borrowing to any extent here, but basically if you're running out of licenses because people are borrowing licenses, they are manually checking out licenses for a period of time. You can restrict them from doing that. You can prevent them from doing it if you need to, if you're running out of license. It's possible that simply you've underpurchased the number of licenses the organization requires. This is something that's really hard to say. You know, most people that if they're constantly running into this issue, they'll realize that, hey, I'm always running out of AutoCAD licenses, I should probably have a few more. That's obviously a determination you'll have to make, but if you're running into this message a lot, that's definitely an option. You also have errors on the client side, so we're starting up a program. Basically, there are two scenarios that you're going to find that you're having errors with a client. When you first start the program, it's going to give you a message. It'll give you a message if it's having issues reaching the license manager, or if you're having issues with the licenses that it's actually finding when it reaches the license manager. There's really nothing else that could be. After you've already pulled the license, you may run into a timeout issue. It's a little more rare, but you could potentially lose the license after a period of time based on default settings or an options file if it's being used. Now, one of the startup messages we see commonly is the FlexNet Finder message. This is something we see. It happens all the time. Basically, you start the program and this box appears. When you cancel out of the box, it will give you the -15 error next to it. Basically, it's asking you to specify a license server system or to specify a license file. If you see this screen, you want to cancel out of this screen and then troubleshoot it. You could click Next, and it will let you enter a server name or an IP address, but it's better to click Cancel and research it deeper. I've seen people type in names and it works, but in most cases, it's not the place to rewrite where your license is looking. There's really only two things this can be, actually. This particular combination is saying the license service is not running where the program is looking. Or it's pointing to the right place and it can't reach that service. There's nothing else this can be. It's where it's going, nothing is running, or where it's going, something's blocking it. Fix is pretty standard. First thing you do is go to the server and you perform a status inquiry and make sure the licenses are running. If the licenses are running, you want to retest it. At this stage, if the license is running and you're starting up and you're not sure where you're looking, there are some things you can do. First, you want to check the firewall. You want to check the firewall on the server. This is the server side that's important. You want to turn off the firewall and retest it. If you don't want to turn off your firewall, I understand. We really only need you to open ports 2080 and 27,000 through 27,009 for TCP incoming. And most Windows firewalls, with the exception of older server systems, you can add these in as one exception. Usually that's enough to let a signal through. That's what our programs are looking for. If you're not sure where your client is pointing, you can point the client using a license variable. We would use a system variable. We would call it ADSK flex _license _file, and we would put in the server name, or we would put in the server IP address. You need to make sure you put the @ symbol before it. That's important. That will make sure that you're looking to a machine. All right. Next we have a startup error, -4132. Valid license could not be obtained by the network license manager. When we see this, this is telling us that the licenses are checked out and being used. You've run out of licenses. Fix, got to do a status inquiry in LM Tools, see if we actually have any licenses available. If nobody else, if there are people that have the licenses that aren't using them anymore, ask them to check them back in. Of course, you can put an options file in, or you can eventually purchase additional licenses if you run into that situation. But this is the client-side error you would see if you have physically run out of licenses. We have a startup -96 or -15. They look the same with the exception of the numbers, but they're pretty much telling us the same thing. The product is not finding the service, or maybe it hasn't started yet. If you just rebooted the server or you just started the service, it may take a minute for the server to finish starting. Sometimes, even though service is a tiny program, sometimes it just takes a second to work its way through. Give it a minute to start up. If we're talking you're waiting 5 minutes, that's too long. But usually a service can start up within a few seconds. Sometimes it takes a minute. Just want to make sure you're giving it enough time to start up. Start the service and see what it does. Then you want to review your LM tool settings. Make sure that your settings are proper. Make sure it's looking to the right file. Make sure it's pointing to the right kernel. And then perform a status inquiry to make sure the licenses are running. And you want to validate the licenses that are running, that they are for the products that you are trying to pull. David, I believe at this stage we have a new poll question.
Thanks, Dave. I'm going to be launching this question. Oh, wait. Does the LM Tools version matter? Yes or no? Does the LM Tools version matter? Yes or no? All right, I'm just going to give you a couple more seconds. 3, 2, 1, and I'll be closing out the poll. I'm just going to share the results right now.
Great.
A phenomenal 98% is yes and 3% is no. And I will now move you over to the next slide with David.
Great. Sorry. It is important, actually. It used to not be so important, but now it is. And the reason it is because with the 2015 products, if you were to have an older license manager, you would receive a 000 error. Valid license could not be obtained. You could see this message with no firewall blockage. You could see this with, you guarantee that you're pointing in the right location. Other products might be pulling off of your server, but 2015 will not start, and you would see this message here. So everything looks great except you're getting a 000. Even in the license manager, you might see 2015 licenses listing as available, but you're still getting a 000 error. This is telling us that you're on the wrong license kernel. 2015 products have to have 11.12. In the past, this was not a necessary requirement. So it wouldn't have been unusual, a year ago, if somebody's on 2014, they would have been on an earlier license kernel. They would have been on, last year was 11.11, I believe. Before that, you'd see people on 11.4, 11.5, and for the most part, they don't run. But now there's a requirement for 15 products. They have to be on 12. This could also be a bad license pointer. The client machine could be looking to the wrong location for a license. If somebody has moved a license file, they could still be looking to the old license area. This could also be a corrupt cascadeinfo.cas file. This is a file that holds certain licensing information. There also could be firewall blockage. Drop the ports in the Windows firewall to get past it if that's the case. For fixing, you can first make sure you're pointing using a system variable. You want to enter in that variable just to guarantee we're looking at the right server. Once we've done that, you can also delete the Cascade Info file. It's in the program data folder, as you can see there. Cascade Info file is a file that pulls down from the server and it keeps locally some basic information as to what licenses that license server can open and in what order and how they'll cascade. It's that sort of information that it's pulling. If that file is deleted and you start up the program, it will build you a new one. And it's the instructions basically for how licenses are controlled. You also want to check the firewall. Like I mentioned earlier, we want to check the ports, make sure they're open. And then you want to validate the license kernel. This is a good one to take a look at here. When validating a license kernel, there are a few things you need to do. You cannot just click Help About. All Help About is telling me here is that the interface that we are looking at on the screen is version 11.12. This doesn't tell me that we're running the license kernel for 11.12. And we have to be running the license kernel for 11.12. If we were to go to the Server Status tab and do a status inquiry, if you scroll down the first couple of lines of information right here, license server up, master 11.12. Now we know we're running on the 11.12 kernel. That's what's important. It would not be unusual for somebody to have 11.12 listed in their Help About, but then when they come and do a status inquiry, they're listing a different kernel version. This would happen if somebody was upgrading a license manager, but they didn't copy over all the files, or they didn't stop the old service and then restart the service with the new kernel. Usually just stopping the service, restarting the service, or deleting it and restarting that might work. All right. So we also have potentially timeout functions. We see these; they're less frequent, but we do definitely see timeout issues from time to time. Basically, the message you're going to get is the product is going to be open. Somebody goes off to lunch, perhaps, and they come back and they sit down and they never closed AutoCAD, for example. And then suddenly they sit down and they move their cursor and a message pops up. It's a simple message and it says license no longer available, and it says you need to save your file. And then people are like, hey, I have my product open, where did the license go? Most products are designed to release licenses due to inactivity over a period of time. So if you open up AutoCAD and then you just leave it sitting on your desktop, there's a period of time. It goes in a cycle. It checks back to the server a few times and it says, all right, I haven't had any action on this desktop for a while. I want to give somebody else the option to use this license. So what it'll do is behind the scenes, it will actually return the license. And what happens is, while they're gone, somebody else opens up AutoCAD and they pull the license that was returned. Now on the primary machine, even though the license was lost, at this stage, if you were to walk by the desktop and look at it, it might look completely normal. Nothing different has changed. But on the background, the license has returned to the server. The second person comes in and takes that license out and is using it. When the other person comes back and uses the software, the first thing that happens when they move their mouse is it takes a split second, it goes back to the server and says, oh, I checked my license back in, I really need that. And it tries to pull the license back again. What happens is it goes and it says, oh, that license is now in use. So then you get this message, it would say, oh, we returned the license for someone else to use, and someone else came along and used it, and now you don't have it. So it'll make you save your work so you don't lose it. And after you save the file, it will close the program. It's something that's set for a period of time. It's a default with products. Basically, it's designed to help you not lose functionality for licenses over time. It wants to let most people use the licenses as much as possible. It's also something that is, it can happen because of an options file setting. You can change the release in an options file. This is something you can't turn off. All you can really do is you can adjust the timeout in the options file. That's the best thing you really need to do. When we get to this granular level of trying to control licenses, I find that usually people have a very strict number of licenses, and they're trying to get the most usage out of what they have. So they have a tight licensing list to start with. Sometimes it's just the client doesn't have simply enough licenses for their need, so they're always trying to force people to check stuff back in they're not using. For some people this works very well, and for other people they really probably need to expand their license list. Those are the basic errors that we have. I did have some links in here I thought were important just to remember. For this troubleshooting, these are sort of the basic areas we go for stuff. If you needed a license, you can get one at www.autodesk.com/register. You'll need your login, and of course you'll need your MAC address, server name, serial number. It should spit you out a file right on screen in front of you, and it will email it to you at the same time. We have a link here for downloading LN tools. This is the 11.12 version. This is also, I had mentioned earlier, it is also available with all the Autodesk installers. If the product has the ability to be on a network license, there will be an option for installing a network license manager in the Tools button when you first start up the program. We also have a virtual agent. Virtual agent does have some links for downloads and network licensing help. Some basic stuff there. This is in addition to our standard knowledge solutions that you would find on Autodesk.com if you were to type in at the top right a search parameter. We also have installation forums. I have a link here. This is where people go to post a lot of questions, and we peruse those daily, so they're usually pretty active. And we also have an installation blog. That's our Up and Ready blog. We've had a pretty good response to the blog over the years. It's quite robust. We also have additional tips and tricks at our Up and Ready blog. You'll see these here, and they got some tools in there and some editors and what have you. And that brings us to the end